Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. I am your host, Justin Dixon, and today we've got Chris Condon on the podcast. He is the founder and CEO of Aircon, which is an AI assisted quoting tool for freight forwarders. So, very interesting episode because we get to dive deep into the world of freight forwarding and all the complexities that go along with that. And Chris is a great person to talk to about it because he started his career as a lumper. You'll learn about what that is on the podcast. But he grew up in the freight forwarding world, and then he became a CEO and bought one of his companies that he worked for with the help of some private equity, and then started Aircon a few years ago. So I think we get a lot out of this episode. So let's get Chris on the pod. Interested in hearing conversations with private equity leaders, CEOs of private equity-backed companies, and startup entrepreneurs where they share their stories about their career journeys, starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, and the important role that having the right talent plays in building a successful business, then you are in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Capital Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Dixon. All right, Chris, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's jump right in. Give everybody that's watching and listening a little bit of an overview of who you are, where you are, and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, so Chris Condon, CEO, founder of Aircon. I'm really a freight guy. Grew up in the freight forwarding world and distribution world, and fell in love with tech from an Aircon perspective. So that's I'm currently in Dallas. We got a team of 24, and just enjoying what life is having to do with all the advancement in the tech.
Awesome. We'll get all into Aircon and all that fun stuff, but I guess talk to me a little bit about, I always like to understand people's origin stories and how they start business and why they did. Because I was looking back, you've been a CEO previously, so you've had the ability to be a chief executive, but maybe walk us through a little bit of your early career and then we'll kind of dig into Aircon.
Sure. Yeah. So I started in the career as a lumper for a company called Tower Group International. So I started off lumping ocean containers during the summer months of the college years.
What is lumping?
Lumping is unloading the ocean containers, right? So now they have some machines unloading. But back in the when I was a young buck, if you will, we did it by hand, and then I became a forklift driver, and then went into warehouse distribution. Ended up doing VMI or vendor managed inventory in El Paso. And that's really where I grew to kind of understand incentives of different people and kind of how things work logistics wise. But I realized that I wasn't going to get promoted at the company I was at because it was warehouse distribution, right? So at the time, warehouse distribution wasn't very appealing. So I learned air. I asked to be moved into the air product.
Okay.
That's where I fell in love with air freight, right? So I went from warehouse guy, forklift guy, into fulfillment, VMI, 1 million square feet, blah, 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 into learning a new product, a new mode that has very different incentives and very different ways to make money than just the kind of the, renting labor, if you will, in space as the warehouse distribution. So from there, I went on to work for a smaller freight forwarder. So I went from a large freight forwarder to a smaller freight forwarder. Ended up buying that with private equity money, rebranded it to Tricon. And that's actually where the light bulb went off from an Aircon perspective. Because of my relationships I had with these marquee shippers or marquee BCOs, I could get us invited as a corporation to compete, right? So brokerage, warehouse, trucking, ocean, and we could compete on all those modes with the exception of air. So I could get invited to these big RFPs, which are multi-million-dollar deals, but I wasn't able to compete. And so that's really where the fire started for, how do we help 300,000 freight forwarders around the world to compete against the 10 or 15 that are talked about in the media?
Got it. I want to go back to the Tricon thing. So how did it work when you were working for what is now, I guess, known Tricon, and then you were like, hey, I'm going to buy this with private equity? How did that whole scenario work? I find that's kind of fascinating.
It is, so it was TransTrade was the name of the freight forwarder that I was working at. And it was, they at the time, so this was 2013, 2016 that I worked for them from a brand perspective. And they didn't make a lot of money, right? And so I was asked to take that over as the CEO from it wasn't a private equity at the time. It was a distressed bank. I don't know how to explain it from a finance standpoint, but Brian was the guy's name. He goes, Chris, I want you to take this company. And the promise I made to him, I said, Brian, if we can turn this around and be profitable, in the next 12 months, we're going to need some serious cash to get out of it, right? Because for the last 10 years, TransTrade didn't make any money. There was a multi-million dollars on the balance sheet of negative debt that the finance company kept putting into it, right? Because kind of once you're pregnant, you're kind of like, where's the next corner that we're going to get through?
Yeah.
And so they sold their portfolio to a large private equity. So that transition basically lost my commitment in terms of my guy, right? Saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. But 2017 was the first year TransTrade made money in over 10 years, right?
Wow.
And so, as that happened, I asked them, one of the marquee large manufacturers that I know of that makes consumer electronics and whatnot that I met in El Paso back in my day. They were going to start making TVs up in Wisconsin, right? So the promise or the commitment she made to me was, like, Chris, you can have all this business. Here's what you have. Here's the volume, blah, 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 blah. And so I went to the private equity company. I'm like, hey, I need $9 million to do this because I don't have credit with all these providers anymore, right? And I can't do another year, begging and saying, hey, the check's in the mail, right?
Yeah.
So he basically told me, no, we're not putting any more money into you. So find a buyer. And I'm like, if you just need a buyer, I'll take it off your hands for, a song and a dance, right?
Right.
And I went out and got an SBA loan. I got a couple $1 million, got an SBA loan, was about to do the deal. And a buddy of mine who had a trucking company was, Chris, don't do it. You find other people's money to do it, because with the SBA loan, one, you're personally guaranteeing it. Two, if something goes bad, like when I first started my trucking company, UPS was my largest account, but my line of credit was based on the AR. And when the AR, because of whatever issue, was tainted, I needed to come up with $1 million in 3 days, right? So learn the risk there. So that's when I made the decision, with his help, to go find private equity to one, buy it, and also give us enough runway to go run, right?
Yeah.
And so we rebranded it to Tricon for a couple different reasons. One, TransTrade really had a bad name in the market, right? It was had credit issues, right? So from a brand standpoint, so we rebranded it. We ended up then COVID hit, right? And the board got a little scared during COVID, right? So non-logistics people not understanding that tragic things around the world, logistics people, that's where they earn their keep. Right?
Yeah.
That's where they figure out solutions of how to move stuff from A to B. That's, and again, cost is what it is. Everybody knows the cost. It is what it is, right? But how do you find a solution to meet your customers' demand, right? Or their commitments that you're making to your customers. And that's really, so Tricon sold a visible supply chain. The story of that is they sold a visible supply chain because of COVID. They were a little scared. They ended up selling to Maersk for almost $1 billion. They wrapped it up with Pilot, the other company they bought, for like $1 billion. And so, so that's when I had a non-compete for a year. So I started working on Aircon. So that's kind of how that went. It's you learn a lot along the way, right? That's part of the journey of doing this, is not necessarily knowing what to do, but why not to do something else.
Yeah. Well, and also you got some pretty sage advice from a friend to be like, hey, don't put yourself at risk. There's people out there that are willing to, that have money, that want to put some of that money to work and back really good people. So the concept of other people's capital or other people's money is a pretty powerful thing. I guess, how did you was it easy to make that decision, that flip, to be like, hey, instead of going down the SBA loan and owning 100% of this thing with a bunch of debt, to obviously they wanted some equity in the business and all that fun stuff. Like, how did that decision kind of work?
Yeah. So the big decision of that one was how much do we give up, right?
Yeah.
Like that's always especially when you're doing private equity, right? They still typically take controlling interest, right? They control the board, blah, 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 blah. So how we structured it was, okay, once you're paid back with a decent return, whatever that is, 20%, 40%, doesn't really matter. Once you're paid back, then if we do exit, we split it in different ways. So there's kind of like a waterfall effect on that. But what's interesting to me, because I don't think of business as building to sell, right? I think that's part of maybe my rub or whatnot. Like, the value of a business is, yes, we're obviously, we're all going to exit, right? We're all going to sell at some point. We're all going to retire, whatever term you want to put there. But man, when you enjoy what you're doing and you're solving problems, like, that's the way my brain works. Like, if I'm not solving a problem and finding a solution for a problem, I get bored, right? So I've learned that over the years. Like, once you get it to a point where you've met your goal, like, okay, it's time to move on to something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, let's talk about that other else. Let's talk about Aircon. It sounds like once you had the exit of Tricon, you had a non-compete, so you had a year or so that you couldn't go to another freight forwarding company or something to kind of take that knowledge. So, talk about what is Aircon? It's AI, so obviously we'll talk a lot about that. But talk about Aircon. How'd you come up with the idea? And then let's walk through it.
Yeah, sure. So the original idea came out because of we couldn't get to the second round on these RFPs, right? So
Mm,
when I was talking, it was actually Microsoft. I was talking to one of my contacts up there, and she told me, she goes, Chris, you're not even close, right? I know you can commit to it. I know you'll get there, but you're not even close. So that's when the first light bulb went off on becoming a tech-enabled wholesaler, right? So becoming a provider to these small to medium-sized freight forwarders and compete and or do the process like these larger freight forwarders do, right? Gateways, consolidation, reducing your net weight, all that kind of good stuff. But what we found over the time was that most freight forwarders don't have a big appetite for the risk, right? Because like you're committing to a price that doesn't really exist yet, right?
mm,
When you're consolidating, right? Like because you're still buying at $1, you're hoping to net down to 50 cents, so you're selling it somewhere between 50 and $1, right? There's
yeah.
a risk tolerance there that we found that a lot of freight forwarders don't like to take, right? Because it's a shipment by shipment basis. And then the second thing we found was that our customers are kind of platform fatigued, right? Like our customer, this was back in like 2023, maybe 22, says, Chris, I love your platform. It's great. I love how you optimize. I love how it goes to 400-mile radius to say what airport, and it checks all these routes and what the schedule is. I love all that stuff. I think it's great. But I don't want to go to another platform, right?
Yeah.
Because I got to go to this RMS. I got to go to this trucking platform, this carrier platform. Like I'm tired, right? I'm just
Yeah.
going to send an email. You guys do it. So we built an agent that basically structured the data from the email, put it into our rate engine, and would respond to the quote in less than 2 minutes,
Okay.
right? General cargo, rack rates, nothing special, but just speed to market. And what we found in the first 90 days is that our throughput went up 60%, right?
So amount of deals coming in that you could then respond to.
Correct. So the
Okay.
demand for our service went up 60%.
Yeah.
Our win rate stayed about the same, right? I think it was like 7.2 to 7.3, something like that. But because of our throughput went up, we were actually responding to every quote that came in, and we could understand, more importantly, why we weren't quoting it.
Mm,
Our revenue went up 2.5x in the first 90 days, right? So simple math, improve your demand, keep your win rate, your revenue goes up, right? It's not a quote to margin question, it's a demand and output question, right?
right.
And so that's when the light bulb really went off. Like, what if we put this in front of our customers, right? So a freight forwarder, they have their rates, they have their contracts, whatnot. They also have an ecosystem outside of that. If we put our agent in front of the customer or in front of the freight forwarder, then the freight forwarder is meeting the demand of the buyer in real time, 24/7,
Yeah.
365, et cetera. So yes, we are AI. Yes, we use LLMs. Yes, we use ML, but our value is not that. It's strictly a tool. Like I use this all the time. When people talk about AI, it's a tool to go do something. It should not be used for a tool to go find out something. And
Mm,
there's a nuance there that I think our industry is learning, right? It's not the task of once you've already made the decision. It's what data can you have to make a better decision,
interesting. Okay.
right?
I want to back up for 1 second and understand more about what the industry of freight forwarding is. So, like, what is a freight forwarder? How does it interact with big companies? You mentioned you come out to Silicon Valley for HP back in the day. Like, what is the industry doing? Is it essentially moving freight literally from one point to another? And how do the economics work? You talked about a few
Yeah. So
different.
from a freight forwarder's perspective, they're really a coordinator of assets
Okay.
provider, right? That's really like we used to say in the day when I worked at one of the large multinationals. We used to say, we're a travel agent for cargo,
No.
right?
Okay.
Like that's really kind of how they look at it. But in today's world, that's so much more complex, right? You have each, governing agencies. You have government, not just from a import export standpoint, but you have IATA, you have FIATA, you have 7 or 8 different government agencies that you got to kind of validate that you're living the rules with, right?
Yep.
You have customs and duties, and then obviously geopolitical stuff that goes on that you got to be aware of, so you can educate your customer on What is a better solution to route it this way versus that way? Because that's really where the value is. The industry has moved, though, and this is where I'm excited about the kind of pivot from an industry standpoint. As we've digitized, as we've become more connected, it's become more about who has access to rates, right? And that was a symptom 15, 20 years ago of like, oh, well, who has better rates? I have better rates because I have a better contract with, XYZ airline, right? Or XYZ trucking company. But in today's world, there's not a lot of value there anymore, right? Because rates are everywhere, right? Rates are, the RMSs, they're in spreadsheets, they're in your email, they're everywhere. You just got to figure out how to pull them, right? Yeah. And what is valid at the time of the commitment, right? Because that's the other thing when I think of like visibility. Visibility is a viewpoint of what happened, right? Very important. Very, it's kind of data intelligence, if you will, of kind of what happened, why did it happen, all that kind of good stuff. Then there's business intelligence that says what should have happened, right? Then there's decision intelligence on how do we make it better next time, right? And so if you triangulate all those things, those are the things that we're really excited about what we're doing from a customer perspective. And our customers are only the freight forwarder. And there's only really one freight forwarder in the transaction, right? Everyone else is the provider to that in the transaction. So they, stereotypically you have forwarder on this side, forwarder on that side. But the reality is there's only one commitment to the buyer. And then it's a value chain in the supply chain, right? So I'm this part of the forwarder part for this part. I'm the forwarder for this part. So the system is designed to carry the goods, right? That's kind of what we look at, right? The goods movement, but there's also cash movement, there's data movement, there's risk movement, and every handoff, there's gaps, right? And when I say gaps, that's where people add margin or there's margin leakage because you didn't think of this rule in this country because you didn't know it at the time of quote, right? But as you learn it, how do you learn from it? And then how do you make it better, have more confidence in your quote going forward, right? Because the quote is really the commitment. Everything else, you're just executing your commitment.
And so your Aircon platform, you are selling this to all the freight forwarders out there to essentially, I guess one of the use cases is what you use is to respond within minutes to every quote that comes in. So as long as you keep your win rate the same, your revenue is going to go up because you're going to win more deals. Is there a point where you run out of capacity because there's only so many trucks and all that stuff, or is it just it fluctuates more than I think about it?
Yeah, so I think so. Again, that's kind of a media play on things, right? So capacity is what it is, right? So who has the capacity? Who has the rate to move it at that capacity? And then what confidence at the time of quote are you confident that you can actually move it, right? And then we're learning from it, right? So as news comes out, like, hey, there's Iran, the straits are closed, so now there's more air freight, or hey, Turkish Air isn't flying into Saudi Arabia right now, or Qatar, whatever the logic is. Then the quote is learning that, right? The forwarder still makes the decision. We just help make the routine decisions routine, right? And so, and again, that's always the 80-20 rule, right? Because 80% of the quotes are routine, right? At the end of the day, that rule of thumb or whatever that logic, I forget who brought that 80-20 rule up, but like, it's true, right? 80% of your quotes can be done automatically. And so you should be able to spend more time on why you're not winning the quotes. I'll give you a good example of this. Is we had a customer, and I've said this for weeks, right? Our speed to quote is our output. That's what we are doing, right? But our value is knowing what you're quoting, right? And why you're quoting or why you're not quoting, right? So for example, is one of our customers did 1,000 quotes last month, right? And the system only automatically generated a quote about 10% of the time, right? So 100 of them.
Yeah.
In this particular case, he moves personal effects, right? So he moves people around, house, furniture, all this stuff, right? And what we found is when we looked at the data, when we went to like, that's kind of weird. It's only 10%. Like we're in the 90, 98, 99s for everyone else. Like 10%, that's really, really bad. But what we found out is that the data shows we weren't quoting it because we were missing dimensions, right? And so, of course, it's hard to quote air freight if you don't have weights and dims, right? But the value that we gave him at that point is like, hey, look at like 90% of the quotes you're not quoting the demand for is missing dimensions.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, 50% says it's a 1-bedroom apartment. 20% says it's a 2-bedroom apartment. Whatever percentage says it's a whatever percentage. Let's look at your past data to estimate what that is, right? Because again, it's a quote, right?
Yeah.
So at the time of quote, this is what you base it off of: this dimension, this weight, whatnot. Now he's loving it, right? Because now because he already had the demand. Now he's just got to figure out why he wasn't winning the business, and it wasn't the quote, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of the weird aha moment in our head in terms of a value. The quote's the output. And the decisions that go into making that quote is where the value lives.
Yeah. And then what are the economics for Aircon? Is it a pure SaaS model where it's just subscription based and they pay you a platform fee, or are you doing any type of rev share, scraping some margin off? It's just a pure.
Yeah. So yes, that's a good question. And we're very strict on this for a couple different reasons. So we strictly charge a subscription fee, an annual subscription fee, and we deduct it $10 a quote, right? So if our minimum is $10,000 a year, it's 1,000 quotes for the year, and you have all year to use it, right? So if you do 100 quotes this month and 20 quotes the next month and 200 the next month, it averages out, right? So again, our tech is designed to optimize for the freight forwarder, not optimize for whoever else is the business, right? Because that's distinct. It's very critical to think this way, because most tech is optimized not for the freight forwarder, right? They're optimized for the airline, they're optimized for the trucker, they're optimized for the buyer, right? In a lot of cases, not the freight forwarder, right?
Yeah.
So we don't take any margin. Everything that comes to our platform in terms of a rate is 100% is passed through. And then at the time of booking, we'll mirror you guys up. We mirror them up with the actual provider, right? So if you're a wholesaler, for example, here's what you quoted, right? Here's the data you quoted. Now you guys figure out, the shipper and all that kind of good stuff. Same thing with customs, right? We're working with a digital customs broker that has local customs around the world, right? So what is needed to get a DDP shipment from a buyer perspective, right? If your shipper is required to do a DDP shipment, how do you get an estimate of duties and taxes without wasting a week, right?
Yeah.
Right. You know what you're shipping, you know what the HCS codes, you know the importer record. That data is already there. It's just where do you go get it, right? And that's the power of AI, is that you can do all this at once.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the fact that, hey, what is the HS code for, a leather shoe made in Hong Kong? It's, hey, this is the description. This is the country of origin of my packing list. Go to this website or this provider that's the expert and then bucket it to bring back an answer you can have confidence in. And then we have confidence scores on that. So again, the forwarder, what risk do you want, right? Do you want to have transit time be most important? Then make sure it's on a direct route. If you want cheap, do a parcel. As you know, you're going to get bumped during capacity times. It's going to be, cargo gets bumped for parcels, right? So again, it's knowing what your buyer expects and then us fulfilling that before they commit.
Yeah, it's that old adage. There's I don't know if you've seen it. It's like there's 3 ways of service: good, cheap, and fast. You can only pick 2 of them. And then so if you want it good and cheap, it won't be fast. If it's fast and good, it won't be cheap. And if it's cheap and fast, it won't be good. So I love that kind of model.
I do love that model. And I take it to a level of people look at quote, book and ship as a linear flow. And I look at it more of a decision, commitment, and then execution, right? Because the commitment there's 2 commitments, right? It's, hey, what I'm committing to the buyer as a quote, and then what the buyer's committing to me at the time of book.
Yeah.
Right. And so to your point is, what did you quote? Was it fast? Was it cheap? Was it reliable? And then let the buyer decide what's most important, not the forwarder. Right. So that's again, kind of that aha moment for me was the area of that, right? Like, why are you quoting the way you're quoting? Are you quoting just to get a rate out there, or are you quoting to win the business?
Right. I'm curious. So if you said it's $10,000, so you can do 1,000 quotes, what if they are a big forwarder and they get more quotes? Because obviously if you speed up the time to quote, obviously you can handle more quotes. So do you have different tiers or?
We do not have different tiers. Again, level playing field, right? Our value compounds the larger you are, right? Okay. So the more quotes that we structure, we just, because of where we sit and what we read, we don't own the data. It's our customers' data. We share it. In fact, we're 100% transparent. They can download at any time everything that we've collected. We actually have prompts for them to build on their own AI in terms of specialized reports by client, et cetera, et cetera. But the value from a large freight forwarder is you're just buying better, right?
Yeah.
So the more data we give you on why you're buying a certain way or why you're not buying a certain way gives you more value. So it's again a flat fee. It's just instead of 10,000, it could be like we have one that's $108,000 contract that has, I don't know, whatever, how many quotes it is. It's $10 a quote.
Okay.
And then if you go over that, we have a mechanism that is 25% higher. So instead of $10, it's $12.50, right? Or
Yeah.
I think it's $12.50 a quote. But the reality of it is, okay, just redo it. And what we're seeing our customers do is like, okay, they signed up for 1,000 quotes. They went through that 3 months. Okay, give me 4,000 quotes because this is awesome, right? Because again, that we show you the value in terms of dollars as well, right? Your time spent, you spend on averaging between a half hour and 4 hours on a quote, and that's during working hours, right? So the world doesn't stop because you're in the office or not. The world doesn't stop because you're on a holiday. The world doesn't stop because of these things. So, which means our agent doesn't stop. Right. It's 24/7, 365. If it's 1 o'clock in the morning here, it's powerful to be the first to quote to your customer and say, hey, I need a rate from Dallas to London. Oh, and by the way, I need it here Friday.
Right.
Well, the normal process is, okay, you're going to quote it. You got to go to your agent, get a rate, come back. Hopefully they're good, right? Then get the booking. Well, now you lost a day. So you've lost a day of options to actually book it. Right. So the sooner we can get to the buyer making the commitment, the sooner that lower that gap of these false bookings, right? Or false, I call it noise, right? Because what's happening is in the real world is forwarders are gambling, right? So they're quoting based on a rate that they see. So they'll pre-book it, right? And this is kind of the ripple effect of the way that the dynamic pricing is working, right? Is they'll book it. And then if they win the shipment, they'll move it, right? But if they don't win the shipment, they just cancel the booking, which from a forwarder perspective, no big deal. I commit, if I got it, I give it to you, right? But from an airline perspective, that kind of screws them up a little bit, right? Yeah. Because they have false hope that this booking is coming in, right? Where the reality is, so if we can shrink that time from quote to commit to book, right? That's the idea. Is another value prop that we have for our clients, right? Is like if we can give you a higher confidence if you can book tomorrow, right? That it will be moved by the time you have it. That's just the other value prop that we unintentionally bring.
So you're making it a little bit more predictable and more consistent in kind of the throughput. So everybody that's part of that supply chain is more consistent and more predictable in kind of what they're expecting versus what actually happens.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. I like the word effective, being more effective, right? Like truckers want to fill their trucks, right? Planes, their incentive is to fill the planes with as high as revenue freight as you can, but there's just a lot of noise in the market, right? Like there's just a lot of like one quote turns into 30 quotes in the market, right? So it's like, but it's only one quote, right? So what's the real data behind that? And that's why people say, oh, you got to clean your data, you got to do all that kind of good stuff. Those are wrappers or AI on really just automation, right? You're just automating the task. You're not thinking about the logic of the 10 different items that need to go into it and what is your confidence level to commit to it.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about, you've been a CEO pre-AI and during AI, right? So I'm curious and even in the interesting thing, you've been in a similar, if not same industry. And so how have you seen leading a business now versus when you were leading Tricon through a turbulent time, right? There's a lot of transition and all that fun stuff, but just from your seat as the CEO, having access to data and having the ability to pull information as needed or even have it in real time. So maybe share a little about that kind of pre and post AI, if you will.
Yeah, so it actually would go back to like 2005, 2006 when I was in warehouse distribution and I helped set up RFID and WMSs in the world, right? That really set the tone for me in terms of what does tech do, right? And I realized like I can't code, like I'm not a coder, like but I have a very good intuition on what tech should be able to do, right? Like, here's the outcome I want it to do. Here's the process that we want it to follow. And so that was kind of the early days in warehouse distribution where I had a vendor managed inventory where I had, let's say 150 suppliers. I had two masters, right? I had the contract manufacturer in Mexico, and then I had the ultimate brand master that actually dictated who did, where did what, right? So how to report on that? What is the logic on what's important? Is it speed? Is it data? What decision needs to be made at what point in time for us to be successful, right?
Got it.
So like inventory control is a good point of that, right? Like when you're doing 24/7 fulfillment, cycle counts become very important, right? But more important is how you do it. It's not just, let's go count it. It's what do we expect and what do we not expect at the time of the count, right? And I'll never forget this. Rudy was my inventory manager in El Paso, and he goes, Chris, I want you to tell me your process. I said, Rudy, I've forgotten more about inventory control than I can ever tell you, right? Because like it depends on what I find when I'm counting, right? Or when the process is happening. And so in air freight's the same way, right? It's like data. Let me rephrase that. So through Transtrade is the same concept, right? It's like, so I had these data people, I've had these coders or engineers, and I would say, okay, at the time, I think we were using CargoWise, and I forget what we were doing, some type of e-com or whatnot. I'm like, hey, well, what if we do this, this, or this? No, can't do it. System can't do it. I'm like, her name was Rosa. I go, Rosa, it's 2020 or 2018, whatever it was. I'm like, I think we can figure it out.
Yeah.
No, I know CargoWise better than anybody, blah, blah, blah. And then the next day she goes, I figured it out, right? I'm like, yeah, because it's just data. So it's what questions are you asking and where's the source of that data, right? It's not the data set itself. It's what data is needed at the time of the request, right? And so that's been really helpful from a VMI. Again, as I look back in my career, the VMI world and dealing with, multiple factories and time being of importance, right? And crossing borders, like, I'll give you an example. In 2001, when we started the VMI for the first time, our SLA was 6 hours from the time the order came in to the time we had to have it ready to ship out of our dock in El Paso, right? Wow. When I left that company, our SLA was 4 hours, but it was from order to deliver to Mexico, right?
It's a bit different.
Extremely different, but knowing, again, what steps were needed. Obviously, the buyer had to change some of their behavior, right? Instead of ordering per carton, they maybe had to order a pallet. So instead of ordering a SKU 5 times a day, you order it 1 time a day, and then you backfill the second day, right? But there's risk there, right? Because you think about cash, right? So who bears the risk of the cash is at the turns on the Incoterms, right? So, but working through those as a solution versus a transaction. You then can, okay, what's important? Well, speed's important. Okay, well, speed's important. I need you to do this. And here's why, right? I can pull a pallet faster. I can pull 10 boxes, right? Oh, and by the way, I can create my Mexican documentation at the time of the order because it's palletized. I know how much fits in a truck.
Got it.
Right? Yeah. So all those little cuts and whatnot add up to a very positive outcome. No different from Formula One, right? Like 5% improvement on speed. Well, now we look at that like it's not that big of a deal, but go back 100 years, 5% every year, it compounds.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And that's the value we're trying to create.
Yeah, they're trying to save milliseconds,
when
they're going around the track, which is, I saw this interview a while ago with Lewis Hamilton. He was like, yeah, if I am 1 pound heavier or some grams heavier, it costs me a second, per 5 laps or so. I'm like, wow, it is that specific and that precise, and obviously it's way more precise than that. So
yeah, and that doesn't happen for me. When I was talking to a guy riding a bike and said, hey, I need the bike to be, 10 ounces thinner so I can go faster. And he said, well, just lose some weight, fat.
He's like, that's not the bike's problem. That's a you problem. That's funny. I like that. Well, I guess so. Let's talk a little about the future and where Aircon's going. Do you see Aircon kind of, you obviously, it seems like you solved a very important problem on kind of the speed to quote and consistency and the throughput there. Are there other aspects of the freight forwarding world that you're trying to solve, or you think is kind of the phase 2 of Aircon to kind of get it, even deeper into the supply chain? Because obviously, most people don't think about how their laptop gets from, production to my desk, right? And so obviously it goes through freight forwarders and countries and customs and all this other fun stuff. So
multiple times.
Yeah. So are there other parts of the supply chain that you see that are ripe for AI innovation, in which that either A, you're trying to solve, or B, that are just out there as big problems that hopefully somebody is going to solve?
I think the biggest problem, and I think the entire world is kind of wrestling with, is identity, right?
Mm,
Who has the authority to make the commitment, right? So, like,
okay.
again, because it's cash, goods are just cash, right? At the end of the day, what we move is basically a different form of cash, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when people think about like cybersecurity and identity and like who's who in the supply chain or value chain, um, AI is going to play a massive part on that, right? And we have some in our value chain, we're pretty buttoned up in terms of who's who and who's responsible for what from a goods, cash, data, and a risk standpoint.
Yeah.
Who's responsible for duties, who's responsible for this truck, like that is very clear to us. But I think the entire industry is going to use that as I think that's what they're wrestling with, right? Like it's hard to prove who did what at the time of when they find out something went wrong, right?
Mm,
And similar to inventory in a warehouse, right? When there's something wrong in inventory in a warehouse, that issue may have shown up 3 years ago, right? It might have shown up at the time of receipt. It might have showed up at the time of consolidation. It might like it's all over. So that's why when you find out what happened, the visibility of it is not very clear unless you know where the starting point was,
got
right?
it.
And so that's where we think we have we're kind of ahead of the game, if you will, in some of this, is because we know why they made the decision in the first place and who they handed that off to, and not get so mucky. Because I think role clarity in the supply chain is going to be the next area where most people need to focus on like what are you in that value chain, who is your customer and who you're responsible to.
Hmm. How do you solve that? Is that sensors? Is that just a more detailed, like, or how does it
The system does not break at execution. We are a firm believer that the system breaks much further upstream at the time of the commitment, right?
Mm,
Meaning once I committed the quote, the operator now has to figure out what went wrong, right? Like, okay, you quoted on American Airlines or Lufthansa again, or X-Freight or AMI. It doesn't matter who you booked it or quoted it on. Now, can you actually move it, right?
yeah.
So the biggest concern for freight forwarders isn't the quote. It's can you move it as you quoted it, right?
Got
And
it.
like all our surveys we've done is the quote's again, I keep going back to the output's the quote because that's easy, right? The rates are everywhere, right? Providers are like, I go to a conference and I get 1,000 emails saying, hey, I would love to be your provider out of, Shenzhen or Hong Kong or wherever, right? But the reality of it is you're a provider in that world, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not a freight forwarder, so I don't really care. But the role clarity on that, are you a provider to the freight forwarder or are you the freight forwarder to the buyer of the goods,
Mm,
right? And that is the first separation in my brain of clarity on what role you play in that transaction, because they do overlap quite often,
okay.
right? Like a trucker could also be an air freight carrier, right? Or the airline sometimes, well, not all the time. The airline picks the ground handler agent, right?
Okay.
But the freight forwarder pays for the ground handler agent on the cargo side, right, at destination, right? So, how do we evaluate that, right? So those are the things like how do you measure, how do you build confidence, and lots of people are working on parts of it, right? And so for our lens, it's how do we find the people that are solving the problem, and then elevate that so the human on the forwarder side has better data and better confidence in their commitment. That
Got it.
and it seems simple to from as we talk through it, but it's air freight's very fragmented.
Yeah, I mean, well, like there's so many players in this game that I don't even know exist. And obviously you're much deeper into it and got a career in it. So obviously, better you to solve it than myself, as far as that goes. And I guess as we kind of wind things down here, if somebody's listening to this, you said that you're not a technical founder in the sense that you're a coder and all that fun stuff, but you now run an AI SaaS platform company. If anybody's listening that is in that boat where they're in an industry that is technology would be a benefit, not a requirement, in a sense to kind of move things forward. What's your advice to somebody that may be listening that is not a technical person, but is like, I have this idea about this problem that I can solve with technology, but I'm not a tech founder?
Yeah, find someone that believes what you're building. That is a techno. Like we have Dennis is our CTO. He is one of the most brilliant brains I've ever had from a tech standpoint. He came from Data Robot, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So find someone that sees the vision, right? And understands not about the money. Like, don't chase the money, chase the solution and chase the value that you're creating. One thing I found out that money, if you have a good idea and a good solution, you can always find a way to make money if you can scale it, right?
Yeah.
And the ideas are what's valuable, right? And finding a solution is what's valuable. And then you just got to execute on the value. But tech is no longer the moat. The idea and the solution is the moat. Like, how are you solving the problem, not the task, right?
Yeah.
And most tech is focusing on the task, not the problem. We talk a lot about, hey, we're solving this problem, but the reality is you're solving this task on this problem, right?
Yeah. No, I like the way you put that. That makes a ton of sense. Chris, man, it's been a lot of fun to kind of learn about your journey and all about freight forwarding that I had no idea that existed and all that fun stuff to learn more. But I do want to wrap things up here with a 3-pack of questions that I ask every guest here. So first question is, what's a book that you found influential or helpful that you'd maybe recommend to the listeners?
So I recommend Freakonomics. John Kroner, I don't even know what his title is now, but at the time he worked at Expeditors, and he made everybody in the region read this book. And Freakonomics, this was, again, early 2000s. And why I love this book is because it makes you look at things differently, right? It's not exactly what it is, the surface, what you think it is, may or may not be truth, right? Yeah. And they have lots of different scenarios in there, but that was really the eye-opening part for me to start looking at things differently. Don't just look at it at face value.
Yeah. No, I love it. I think I read it a while ago. It's an older book, but I read it a while ago, but one of those ones that probably is, stands the test of time. You got to read it every once in a while, just kind of reset.
Then I'll give you the second one is Good to Great, right? So those two books are my ultimate favorite in terms of business books or philosophy books, however you want to say that.
Yeah. Good to Great's one of those ones that I think everybody will recommend until for a long, long time. I feel like so. Yeah. Awesome. Second question here. What's your favorite thing to do outside of work?
So I spend a lot of time with my family. I think my family is just time with family. I don't care if it's golfing, we could be swimming, we could be barbecuing. It doesn't matter. I just like spending time with my family, right? Like, and my family isn't necessarily always blood, right? So it's but just time with other people and not with no agenda, right? That's kind of like I just enjoy that more, and especially getting older, right?
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of times we're so scheduled. So sometimes it is nice to just have like hey, let's go hang out, let's do something. And then you do it ad hoc as opposed to mapping out every single second of your day, on Zooms and things like this. So
that's right.
All right, last question here. Favorite vacation spot?
Ooh, that one. So we do New Year's Eve. We go to Cancun every year with my cousins from Wisconsin.
Okay.
That's probably my wife and I's favorite vacation spot, but it's really because of the people that we're with. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, my wife is a beach girl, right? So anywhere where there's water, we try to get to, especially living in Dallas. We don't have very good lakes. I lived in Seattle. Well, we both lived in Seattle for a lot of years, so we do miss the water. So anywhere we can find water.
I would say that the water temperature is much better in Cancun than up in Seattle. So you're not going to be sitting on the beach and then going just taking a dip in Seattle. So that makes a lot of sense. But New Year's Eve would be cool to be, not on a beach somewhere, kind of hanging out. It'd be kind of
we've done it now for 4 or 5 years now, and it's just one of those things where, okay, where are we going next year? Okay, what secrets we're going to in Cancun, and let's figure it out. Again, we just hang, and they're not normally private. They always have a party. I'm a Packer fan, so they normally have, the last game of the season is usually that Sunday or Monday night. So the rule is it's got to have a U.S. sports bar so we can watch the Packers play. That's the only rule we have.
That's fair. Chris, man, I really appreciate the time. If people want to understand more about freight forwarding, or they are a freight forwarder, somehow they found this podcast and they want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way to reach out and connect?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, obviously Chris Condon, website aircon.ai. You can also email me at ccondon@aircon.ai as well. So we're here. We're available anywhere you can find us online. You can find us.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have all that stuff on the show notes. Chris, man, it's been a great pleasure to get to know you a little bit better. I appreciate you being a guest.
All right, Justin, I appreciate you too. Have a great day.
I hope you found at least one actionable insight from this episode of the Growth Capital Podcast, your one-stop shop for insights from private equity leaders, CEOs, and startup entrepreneurs on starting, investing in, and scaling successful businesses, as well as the role having the right talent plays in growing a successful business. It would be greatly appreciated if you would rate and review this podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and drop us a comment so we can expand the audience of this podcast. Thank you for all your support, and don't forget about upcoming episodes dropping every Tuesday.